During the mid-1980s, Florida's Tampa Strip was torn apart by a twisted killer.
This individual had a skill, and that skill was killing.
His sadistic actions fueled by an inner fury.
His biggest problem was he grew to hate women.
That day, he came very close to killing me.
Those who lived tell the tale of a monster.
One minute he was calm as a 4-year-old child, next thing he was a raging bull.
With an insatiable desire.
How high is the body count going to go before we catch this guy?
But what drove this prolific perpetrator?
He's enjoying what he's doing, and he's going to kill again.
And was he born to kill?
Anything that can composite a serial killer, he's like the poster child.
Although Florida is famously known as the Sunshine State, in 1984, the city of Tampa had a reputation for coming alive after dark.
In the mid-1980s, it was kind of a raucous area of downtown called the Strip.
There's a lot of bars, a lot of strip bars, a lot of prostitution on the streets, drug sales, people coming and going.
Operating in the area was a vicious killer who had left behind him a trail of bodies, each crime scene revealing the ferocity of his violence.
It was a tense, nervous situation at the time when you have somebody like that, roaming the streets.
On the night of the 3rd of November 1984, 17-year-old Lisa McVey was on her way home, following a double shift at a local donut shop.
I always took the same route on the way home. It was always dark, but it just seemed darker that night than usual. So I'm pedaling my bicycle on the sidewalk, but a car went by and blew the horn. And I'm thinking, that was kind of odd. Why would a car go by and blow a horn? I'm on the sidewalk. I got halfway down the street. I noticed there was a car in the parking lot of the church. And I looked back to the church again, and next thing I know, I was just yanked off my bicycle. It felt like 3 or 4 guys just jerked me off my bike to no end. And then I felt the cold steel barrel of a gun to my left temple. He dragged me across the street. I couldn't see his face, but he got me to the car, same car I had seen in the parking lot. He threw me into the driver's side. I remember seeing white bucket seats. I remember seeing red carpet. I remember seeing a huge knife sitting in the middle of the seats. He blindfolded me, bound my hands, my wrists, and my feet. He also took my seat and reclined it back. Shortly after that, he drives off. About 20 minutes, maybe 25 minutes. He got off the interstate, drove for a short distance, and I was able to see beneath my blindfold. It's dark outside, but I could still see tops of trees because I was reclining back in the seat. I'm like, this is it. He's gonna kill me here.
Lisa's abduction would eventually be the turning point in the hunt for the depraved killer. The story began 8 months earlier, a short distance away, southeast of Tampa. Detective Gary Terry was called to a crime scene of appalling brutality.
2 young boys had been playing off East Bay Road, and they had discovered a body, and they went to their parents, and their parents went, saw the body, and then they called the office. When I arrived at the scene, we had some units already in position. Patrol units had already cordoned off the area. There was a barricade just down here a little ways. The children had been playing beyond the barricade, and that's where they found the body. She was lying on her stomach with her head facing in the southwest direction. Her legs were spread. We measured from one heel to the other, and that distance was approximately 5 foot 1 inches in width. She had her hands bound behind her back. There was a ligature about her neck. It wasn't until we cut the ligature off at the medical examiner's office that you could actually see a lead-like or leash-like effect from the ligature. The cause of death of this particular victim was asphyxiation or strangulation.
As investigators examined the shocking scene, they would unearth a distinctive piece of evidence.
We recovered tire impressions, and then of course the crucial evidence is that we found the red trilobal nylon fiber. They could not say where it came from, the source of it. And of course, this day and time, you think DNA. Well, in 1984, there was no DNA.
The body was eventually identified as that of Lana Long, a dancer who worked on Tampa's infamous strip.
In the mid-'80s, we had very rarely had homicide victims bound. So that really caused, a red flag to alert us that, we had a problem on our hands.
As investigators began to work the case, few would have guessed that the man they were searching for would soon become one of the most notorious killers in American history. In May 1984, exotic dancer Lana Long had been brutally raped and sadistically strangled before being dumped in a rural area near Tampa, Florida. Despite a lack of witnesses, the perpetrator had left some clues at the scene, including a distinctive red fiber. When Gary Terry received a call about the discovery of a second body, he quickly began to fear the worst.
I can vividly remember driving on the way to the homicide scene, telling myself, please, please don't let this person be bound. And that's the first thing I asked the deputy at protecting the crime scene. Is this victim bound? And he said, yes, sir, she is.
The body was that of prostitute Michelle Sims. She'd been found in a secluded lover's lane, east of Tampa City.
When they called me on that particular crime, and of course, right off the bat, you're trying to say to yourself, is this related to the first one we found just several weeks earlier?
Now we're approaching, this is the area right here. And at one point we had a downpour just like this while we're processing the crime scene.
When we got to the scene, she had a ligature around her neck and she also had her throat cut. We found the pieces of rope that were used and they all seemed to be cut in same length. This kind of gives you an indication that this wasn't just a quick crime. This is something that somebody has planned.
Despite challenging weather and rough terrain, detectives uncovered a crucial piece of evidence.
In close proximity to her body was a sandy area. You had the tire impressions.
We were able to get an entire roll of the tire from one end to one end, and we were able to match that to portions of that we were able to get at the other crime scene for Lana Long.
The presence of the distinctive red fiber, also seen at the murder of Lana Long, confirmed that Tampa indeed had a serial killer stalking the area.
They're both females. They are nude. They're taken out of the city, dumped in the county, and they have ligatures attached. And it just jumps out at you that these two cases should be related or connected. In other words, the same killer is most likely responsible for these two cases.
The brutal murders had abruptly ended the troubled lives of the two working girls. 30 years previously, another single woman searching for an escape had arrived in the Sunshine State. Newly separated Luella Long had left her hometown in West Virginia in 1955 with her 2-year-old son, Bobby Joe. However, their new life together proved to be far from easy.
He had a series of injuries. He fell off a swing, and when he regained consciousness, he had a stick in his eye. The more serious was the one where a car hit him, and he was hospitalized. But when a car hits a child, it's going to cause damage. He had an attention disorder, as well as a misformed chin.
Luella's chosen career in Miami would create further complications at home.
She tried to wait tables and things like that, but she couldn't make a living. And so she found a job at a place called Big Daddy's down there, and it was a bar lounge. And that's when the trouble really started with her son, Bobby Joe, and herself, because he didn't like the way she was dressed to go to work in scanty clothes, you know, and he just was a very unhappy little boy.
As he grew older, Bobby Joe's relationship with his mother became increasingly strained.
Bobby Joe's mom was one of the prettiest women I had ever seen as a 16 or 17-year-old. She had scores of men constantly biting for her attention.
They had to share one room, and for quite a period of time, he slept with his mother. She often brought men home with her, and he resented that.
Adolescent boys need to see their mothers as asexual. So when a mother brings boyfriends over to the home, walks around partially dressed, as was the case in Long, you can see how that can really have a very, very unsettling effect on an adolescent boy.
Their sexuality is developing, and they're having feelings about this woman's body, and it feels inappropriate, so they're ashamed, but also they're aroused. It's creating confusion, it's creating anger as well at the mother for doing this, to putting them in this position.
Bobby Joe's resentment towards his mother would also rear its head outside the family home.
Luella tried very hard to be a good mother to Bobby Joe, and she would often take him to the beach. And once he almost drowned, and he held her accountable that she was looking at other men when she should be looking at him.
They were close, but they also fought quite a bit because he wasn't really approving of her relationships with all the different men she had been around.
A rare medical condition would instill feelings of insecurity as Bobby Joe progressed through his teenage years.
Bobby Joe Long had been born with an extra chromosome, which manifests itself in a female way. He had breasts when he was 13, but he did have surgery to reduce that.
He would never take his shirt off when we would all go swimming like the other boys were doing and everything. He would always keep covered up. And as a matter of fact, when we got older and we were intimate with each other, he would always keep his shirt on.
Bobby Joe Long had Klinefelter syndrome, a double X chromosome in the cells, and has a number of negative consequences, one of which is gynecomastia, the development of breasts in men. And you can see how a child or an adolescent would be brutally teased, for a boy developing breasts.
So first of all, he has the humiliation of his own body, and then he also had to undergo a number of surgeries to get these breasts reduced, which also is embarrassing and painful and would probably make him resent women.
13 years later, in 1984, across the state on the Gulf Coast, 2 women working the Tampa Strip had been brutally strangled by a single killer. As police pursued the cases, the body count continued to rise. 2 more women were murdered in quick succession, but the M.O. appeared to be at odds with the first 2 victims.
That was the body of Elizabeth Laudenbach. She was fully clothed. She was not bound. There was no obvious trauma to the body.
At the next murder scene, Detective Gary Terry observed differences even more significant than the last.
The property owner came out of the sod farm. On this particular evening, after dark, he locked the gate and then walked over to the barbed wire fence here. And it was at this location that he actually discovered Chanel's body. It was lying underneath the fence. While there were some similarities, the biggest difference was the fact that this victim was black, not white like our previous victims. And another big difference was the fact that she had suffered a gunshot wound to the back of the neck.
Despite these discrepancies, Chanel Williams had been a prostitute working the Tampa Strip. Forensic examination of both crime scenes would irrefutably link all the murders to just one killer.
The evidence was sent to the FBI laboratory, and sure enough, it came back red trilobal nylon carpet fiber. So actually, this was our fourth homicide victim and the fourth case in the series involving the same suspect.
While they continued their search for a suspect, investigators would learn that the perpetrator's desire for death and destruction was becoming insatiable.
At one point in the investigation, we were finding a body about every 2 weeks.
The time spans are so short between them that you just, every time the phone rings, you just kind of cringe because you know it's going to be a call to respond to another scene.
The fear was thickening. The police were baffled, and the bodies kept turning up.
He's maturing, he's progressing, and he's enjoying what he's doing, and he's going to kill again.
Just 1 week later, this prediction would be proved right when 28-year-old Karen Dinsfriend was found strangled to death. The former prostitute was yet another victim who had been working Tampa's infamous strip.
They all had the same lifestyle. They all came from basically the same area of town. So we started focusing our attention to that area.
This was a horrible realization. The working girls from the strip, those working there were scared to death.
They knew what was happening. They knew about the victims. Some of them even knew the victims, and they were petrified, but that was the only way they could make money.
The police started talking to the club owners and trying to get some clue about suspicious-looking people. But as one club owner said, everybody walking in here looks suspicious.
Despite a heightened state of alert, the day of Halloween would bring another gruesome discovery to the east of the city.
We respond to the scene and we find the mummified remains of a female victim lying in the ditch.
The body would later be identified as that of Kimberly Hobbs. The 22-year-old prostitute had been viciously strangled, and once again, the twisted killer had unwittingly deposited the mysterious red fibers at the scene.
How high is the body count going to go before we catch this guy? You know, how many other victims are out here that we haven't discovered?
"11 years before the carnage began, over 270 miles away in the city of Hialeah, troubled teenager Bobby Joe Long had made a positive impression with one of his contemporaries.
There was a park that a lot of the kids used to play at, and we would go there after school and play football with the boys. And he came one day, and that's when I met him. He was very nice, a very funny personality, and a lot of fun to be around, and we just hit it off right away.
He wasn't anything out of the ordinary. He was just an average kid. It was a little bit of a wise ass.
As Bobby's attitude deteriorated, his school life would start to suffer.
He was a poor sport, didn't like to lose. He did manage to skip school as much as he could possibly get away with. And I don't believe he even graduated high school.
He was not accepted at school. It was his manner more than anything else. Mostly he was scrappy. Mostly he was brash. He was not refined in any way.
He used to fight a lot with other people. He would never back down from an argument, and it would eventually turn into blows.
Local hunting expeditions with friends would often inspire the worst in Bobby.
He always wanted to go a step further. We used to do a lot of spear fishing. We had regular spear guns, but he had bought these two attachments. They were called power heads, and that you would unscrew the spear and the screw on this attachment, and it would hold a 12-gauge shotgun shell. He goes, I'm gonna go down and shoot that shark with this power head. I gotta see what it'll do. And he went down and blew it away, shot it right in the head, and the thing just never moved. And he came back up very, very excited about what he had just done. He just had to see the damage.
Long was a very sadistic individual. His sadism just poured out of him. And one thing he said, which was interesting, was he really didn't understand what made him do this. And that's probably true.
Despite these displays of aggression, one girl would stand by him. Childhood sweetheart Cindy was convinced Bobby Joe Long was her destiny.
As soon as I met Bob, I just, a young girl in love, and I just figured that that was who was going to be my husband. And we dated for, several years. We had a lot of fun together. We'd go to the movies, go spearfishing down in the Keys, run around the neighborhood as younger kids and paper people's houses. And I mean, we weren't bad kids, but we were mischievous. He was a very caring person, and I was, I guess, his prize catch or something. We were best of friends.
Over a decade later, across Florida, Tampa Bay remained in the grip of a killer. Having gruesomely murdered 6 innocent women, the twisted perpetrator was about to come face to face with 17-year-old Lisa McVey. During 1984, Tampa Bay, Florida was plagued by a sadistic serial killer. Just 4 days after the discovery of his 6th victim, Kimberly Hobbs, the perpetrator would act again. Lisa McVey recalls the terrifying night she was grabbed from her bicycle and bundled into a car. During the ordeal that followed, she was blindfolded and led to a murderer's apartment.
I was thinking to myself, I need to get some type of information on him. Who is this guy? What's he look like? And if I can't see him through my eyes, I'm going to see him through my hands. We're in some type of apartment. It's fresh new paint. It smells very new. He directs me to the bathroom, orders me to take my clothes off, and we step into the shower.
Despite being subjected to repeated abuse, Lisa learned to placate the man, whose anger was fierce and unpredictable.
His demeanor was very aggressive. I did what he told me to do. I was afraid if I didn't, he would kill me. Then he got in the shower, and it was like night and day. It was like a fantasy for him. It was like he started bathing me, started washing my hair, and he was trying to touch me gentle. He would hold me for a second, and all of a sudden become this aggressive monster again. It was like one minute he was calm as a 4-year-old child, next thing he was a raging bull. I remember that we had a conversation. And at one point during the conversation, I asked him, I said, why are you doing this to me? He said he was doing this to me because he was getting back at women in general, for a really bad breakup with another girl. And then right after that, he puts my hands on his face. Again, he starts to soften up, like he's trying to live a fantasy of a boyfriend and girlfriend relationship. He guides my hands over his face. Now I'm seeing what he looks like. He's got pockmarked face, a small, clean-cut mustache, small ears, small nose, thick eyebrows, short hair. It was like I just saw him through my hands.
After 26 torturous hours, Lisa was convinced that her end was near.
About 3 o'clock in the morning, he got me dressed. And he asked me, what am I supposed to do with you? And I said to him, it's like, why I'm blindfolded and still tied up. I said, listen, this is how I played on his heart. I said, listen, I know you said that you've done this to other women before because of a broken relationship. It's unfortunate how we met. You seem like a nice guy. I can take care of you. I'll be your girlfriend. And I won't tell anybody how we met. And that guy, I'm thinking, no, I can't keep you. Where do you live? And it opened the door of, I will go ahead and drop you off in the area you live in.
Upon her release, Lisa was able to recount her ordeal to investigators. However, as her case was centered around abduction, it was not initially linked to the serial killer operating in the area. Three days later, the discovery of the body of another prostitute, Virginia Johnson, would signal to police that the murderer had struck again.
After discovering victim number 7, we were definitely in uncharted waters. And we're coming up with nothing. We're hitting a dead end, every lead we're getting.
The perpetrator was killing with reckless abandon.
The individual was not covering his bodies up. He was not digging a grave and putting them in a hole. He would kill them, then he would just throw them away.
He wanted them found, and he wanted whoever found them to be shocked, not just at the idea of a dead body, but the position, because it was a way to humiliate the victim, to put her in the most vulnerable, grotesque possible display, so that when people saw her, that's what they would think.
When Gary Terry received a call on the 12th of November, he knew that it could only mean one thing: the killer had struck again.
After being called by the Tampa Police Department to this scene, I came up to this side of the roadway here on Orient Road and looked down the embankment, and you could see the body of the victim. She was spread eagle on her stomach. As soon as I saw the body, the way it was displayed out there, I knew it had to be him again, the killer.
The body was that of Kimberly Swan, a dancer from the same Tampa Strip bar where the first victim, Lana Long, had once worked. Detectives were now becoming exasperated with the lack of leads. The need to identify a suspect was occupying authorities around the clock.
We're 8 victims down and evidence still accumulating, and we're finding new evidence at every case, but we have nobody to put it with. And so there's nothing stopping this guy from continuing to kill.
Over a decade earlier, during the 70s, across the state near Miami, high school dropout Bobby Joe Long had struggled to land a steady job. Searching for some direction, he joined the Army in 1972. The new recruit would earn a commendation and find some stability in his turbulent life. Private First Class Long was also ready to settle down.
We were married January the 25th of 74, and his accident happened March the 14th of 74. He was on his motorcycle. He was at lunch, and he was going down US 1, and an older gentleman didn't see him and hit him, and he flew, if I'm not mistaken, like 100 feet and landed on his head. He had head trauma.
We have a guy with brain damage already from head injuries. So we have a lot of circumstances. They seem to collude together to turn him into an aggressive individual.
Following the incident, Bobby also developed an uncontrollable urge.
During this time, he had a complete sexual change in appetite. When his wife came to see him daily, in a cast, he demanded sex every day. His sexual appetite seemed to have no bounds, and the nurses there said that he masturbated, many times a day, and he was just wild.
In the wake of the accident, Cindy remembers her husband as a changed man.
It was pretty much right away. It started becoming physical with me. If he didn't like what I cooked, he'd have a fit and we'd end up in an argument. And I remember him sitting on top of me in the bed and putting his knees here where I couldn't, get him. And he was choking me and punching me in the face, and I couldn't even scream.
As the years went by, the physical abuse intensified. Cindy would eventually be hospitalized after a particularly brutal beating.
I really think that day he came very close to killing me.
The abuse became so constant, it ultimately pushed Cindy to the brink.
I went home. I loaded a double-barrel shotgun. I sat there with it at his head and tried to pull the trigger. He woke up when his alarm went off. And he said, "Go ahead, bitch, you don't have the nerve." But I couldn't do it because my babies were in the rooms next to me, and I didn't want to be without my children. At that point, I knew I needed to leave before somebody was hurt bad.
If Long was angry for a long period of time and then suddenly lost somebody who had kept him from acting out, once she's out of the picture, it's a freeing of him being able to go out and do something that he's probably fantasized about.
Cindy was granted a divorce in July 1980. Bobby Joe Long would then set up a new life in Tampa. 4 years later, the Gulf Coast city had suffered 8 murders in just a few months. As the net was cast far and wide in search of the killer, finally, a breakthrough. Police had discovered the distinctive red fibers on the clothing of kidnapped victim Lisa McVey, confirming that the man behind the serial murders was also responsible for Lisa's abduction.
She was bright enough to remember almost everything about the incident, and that was the first break that the police had.
She was able to give a description of him, a description of his apartment. She said they stopped at an ATM machine, and she wasn't sure which road she was on, but it was just a short ways from the apartment that she had left blindfolded.
She remembered the vehicle she was being transported in. She described the vehicle as being reddish or orangish colored. She said it was white seats. But she said one odd thing about the car, it had the word Magnum on the dash.
Armed with a concrete lead, detectives believed the perpetrator was finally in their sights.
The task force really went into action. They knew they were looking for a Dodge Magnum, and so they got a statewide list of everyone who owned a Dodge Magnum.
One red Magnum would eventually stand out.
2 detectives spot a Dodge Magnum, and it's reddish colored. And they actually pull this car over. He's very cooperative. He actually steps away from the car, and he allows them to take a Polaroid photograph of himself at that time. The officers come back to the task force headquarters. Detectives meet with Lisa, show her the photo array, and she picks him out and says, "That's the guy that kidnapped me, that's the guy that raped me."
His name was Bobby Joe Long. A surveillance team was assembled to monitor his every move.
Surveillance team followed Bobby Joe Long to this location after he left his apartment, and he vacuumed out his car. And our first thoughts were, he knows he's about to get caught and he's getting rid of evidence.
When they follow him to a movie theater, and actually he goes in and watches Missing in Action with Chuck Norris. And all the time he's watching the movie, there's a ugly bearded guy behind him, there's one in front of him, there's 2 or 3 on each side. And while he's doing that, there's another surveillance team watching the car outside in the parking lot. And you still have that gnawing doubt in your gut. Is this really the guy you've been chasing for 8 months? And so I tell the undercover detectives that are outside watching his car, I said, listen, tell me what kind of tires are on the car. And they say, we have a Goodyear Viva tire, and then we have this other oddball tire, it's called a Vogue.
The distinctive tread matched the imprints discovered at the crime scenes.
As soon as he said those words, there was no doubt in my mind, that was our killer.
With the suspect finally within reach, authorities knew there was no time to waste. Bobby Joe Long had to be stopped before he killed again. Following a series of connected murders, kidnapped survivor Lisa McVey had provided Tampa police with vital clues in their hunt for a serial killer. When the suspect's tire tread matched those discovered at the crime scenes, police were convinced they had finally found their man. Upon his arrest, Bobby Joe Long, the man who had killed without mercy, surrendered without a fight.
When I saw his picture up on the TV screen that day, I was totally shocked that he could do that. I didn't think he would have that in him.
We were all in total disbelief. I would have never believed it. Never in a million years.
Not only did Bobby Joe confess to the murders of 8, he claimed responsibility for 2 more victims, Vicky Elliott and Artis Wick.
He was the typical cold-blooded killer. I mean, he had no regrets. He had no emotion for him. Nothing that he showed any remorse for his actions.
During the interview, they talked to Mr. Long, why did he do this? And did you surveil the victims or anything like that? And he basically said, whenever he got the urge, he just did it. But he couldn't explain the fact that he always had a knife, a gun, or the shoelaces, in his vehicle ready to be utilized when he committed these homicides.
But shockingly, Long's criminal career had begun over a decade earlier. He freely admitted to a spate of rapes across the state of Florida.
That's when he confessed to being the rapist, following classified ads and going to look at either houses or furniture that people were selling, and if it was a female by herself, then he would rape her.
He was very clever about it. He would look in ads for people who were selling furniture, particularly bedroom furniture. And he would come at a time when he believed the husband would be away from home, dressed up, looking good. If a man answered, he'd go look and, nope, it's not what I want, so nothing lost. If a woman answered, she'd take him back to look at the furniture and he could subdue her and rape her.
Bobby Joe would later describe the uncontrollable urges that had driven the twisted sexual attacks.
If I didn't do it, if I tried not to do it, I'd be okay for, a day, 2 days, but it wouldn't stop. This would go on until I did it. Then when I would do it, I'd be okay for a month, 2 months, 3 months, sometimes longer. Sometimes a couple of weeks, sometimes a week. And then it would hit again.
He's a rabid dog. He's not frothing at the mouth, dealing in everyday life situations. But believe me, when you get him in that car with that girl tied up in the front seat with him, and you look at his face then, I guarantee you, you will see a rabid dog.
Ultimately, Long's sexually depraved acts progressed to multiple murder. Despite his mellow confession, the killer's mask would slip in court.
He passed by the front of one of the television cameras that were covering the proceedings, and he spit right into the lens of the camera. That face right then, when he had that flash of anger, when he spit at the camera, that gave you a little bit of what these poor girls must have seen right before they died.
These perverse sexual fantasies in serial sexual murderers are not learned from magazines or watching sadistic movies and tapes and so on. Their fantasies predate it. It begins 10, 15, 20 years earlier in the offender's mind, in his fantasies, and eventually he acts it out.
Bobby Joe Long would be sentenced to death for his heinous crimes. But how did this serial rapist develop a desire for death? Was he purely the victim of a troubled life, or was he born to kill?
Born to kill? I don't believe so. I got to disagree with that. He chose that. He chose that path.
I think something snapped that led him to be what he turned into be. His biggest problem was he grew to hate women.
His violence was there. It was uncontrollable. It escalated. Anything that can composite a serial killer, he's like the poster child.
I wouldn't say he was a born killer, but when you try to understand individuals like this, it's unknown whether the problem is hormonal, whether it's electrical, whether it's genetic. And so when you look at the combination of the behavior, the sexualized behavior that he had with his mother, plus his own gynecomastia, the development of breasts as a result of Klinefelter syndrome, you could really see that that is not going to end well.
Bobby Joe Long to me is no different than a drug addict or even an alcoholic. Just like an alcoholic needs to have a drink, a drug addict would like to get some crack. A serial killer like Bobby Joe Long, in my opinion, is addicted to killing. That's what makes him feel the best.
Bobby Joe Long resides on death row in Florida to this day. His trail of sadistic violence has indelibly marked the lives of those who crossed his path.
I can't never imagine how anybody that gave you 2 children or was the love of your life, how you could treat that person like that, you know, or put aside everything else. How do you treat any human like that? Nobody has the right to lay a hand on you. I don't think I'll ever be over it, to be honest with you.
But for survivor Lisa McVey, the experience has inspired a brave new chapter in her life.
I wasn't going to allow anybody to hurt me again. And the only way I knew how to do that was to get into law enforcement. Serving and protecting, it's real. It's not on my watch, are you going to be hurt tonight? My empowerment comes from being so helpless and lost, that feeling I had when I was 17 years old. I'm not lost anymore. I'm on top of my mountain, and it feels pretty good.